Well, welcome everyone. I'd like to welcome you to the webinar, Why Network Management is Still Critical Even When Your Employees Are Working From Home. We're going to be going over the results of a survey that we conducted recently on the recent work from home phenomenon, and really how organizations are dealing with all of the issues that they're facing and all of the issues that they had to face really all of a sudden with very little notice. So before we get started, I'd like to just tell you a little bit about Osterman Research so you understand our perspective in all of this. We're an independent market research and consulting firm, and our focus really is on the way that people communicate and collaborate in the workplace. So we do a lot of research on things like security, archiving, network management, content management, and so forth. We do a lot, as I mentioned, we do a lot of primary research. The company was founded about 19 years ago, and we're based in Western Washington. With me on the call today is Bassam Khan, and he is a VP with Gigamon. Bassam, welcome to the webinar today.
Great, thank you, Michael, and hello to everybody. Just one quick slide on Gigamon. If you have not heard of us, we provide a visibility and analytics fabric. We are a technology company focused on technology with a strong focus on our customer success. We're used by most large organizations out there, as well as quite a bit of medium-sized organizations as well. One quick thing on Visibility Analytics Fabric, that technology used to be called Network Packet Broker. And in a couple of slides down, we'll see where Network Packet Broker has become the Visibility Analytics Fabric and how it's helping in the new IT of today.
Great, well, thank you very much, Bassam. So we're going to be talking about network management, before and during the pandemic. And before the COVID-19 pandemic, we found that networks were complex and sprawling, particularly in very large organizations. There were a lot of pieces in most networks, a lot of moving parts, particularly as organizations are moving a lot of their critical business applications, a lot of their critical data sources and so forth to the cloud, but also maintaining things on premises. We see a lot of legacy on-premises solutions, things like routers and switches, SIEMs, EDR solutions, firewalls, lots of different security and related solutions that are built into the corporate network. Again, as I mentioned, a lot of cloud services that manage business critical information, and we're seeing more and more of that obviously over time as more organizations are reliant on SaaS applications, on bare metal applications in the cloud and so forth. They also have to provide, a lot of secure access to various data stores. We're seeing, as more and more content is really becoming mission critical, and as more of it is subject to regulatory compliance, things under the GDPR or the California Consumer Privacy Act, for example, along with a lot of other privacy regulations. We're seeing that secure access is becoming very critical. It's always been important. It's actually becoming mission critical now because the penalties for non-compliance with these various regulations really are quite severe. Also, organizations have to provide a means of compliance, with a lot of other regulations, things that have been around for a long time, HIPAA and FERPA, Gramm-Leach-Bliley and so forth. And finally, they have to support a lot of key business functions. These networks have to support, critical business functions that are really growing in tenor and growing in importance. Now, during the COVID-19 pandemic, we're seeing things that are exactly the same. Nothing has changed in the context of how organizations need to manage their networks. The networks are still big and sprawling, and even more so now as you have more and more workers working from home. You still have to support all of the legacy on-premises solutions. There are a lot of cloud services that have to be maintained, and even more now as employees are using these services, basically to do work in ways they haven't done before. And so fundamentally, we have all the same set of problems with an additional set of problems because of everybody working from home. So, fundamentally, nothing has changed. As I mentioned, we still have the same problems and more because of the pandemic. So, Bassam, I wanted to get your take on this. I mean, how are organizations dealing with all of these changes in the context of network management as a result of having so many millions of people working from home?
Right. If you click over to the next slide, this is something that we have been very keen on understanding. How are organizations dealing with this rapid onslaught of network and infrastructure changes that we've had in moving the organization, what we call inside out, where most employees are now outside coming in. So we've talked to, very proactively reached out to about 22 different organizations. And these are rather large organizations. We did talk to a number of smaller ones as well, a little bit more of a less qualitative, more quantitative kind of a feedback. So in the next click, what we can see is a number of different areas. We had about 28, 30 different individual items, things that IT organizations did right, and some things that they felt that could have been done better. It was a very frank discussion. What we've done here, and what I'm going to dive into deeper into in the later slides, is kind of categorization of all 28, 30 different individual feedback items into these categories. The first one is really around the work from home. This is what we call phase one of the new tomorrow. Phase one is just moving the network inside out and being able to deal with a lot of traffic coming in. But the new tomorrow is more than that. It's more about security. It's more about uncertain budgets. That is going to be impacted. Nobody knows exactly how, but it is going to be impacted. Some industries are feeling the pain more than other industries. In fact, some of our customers are doing quite well right now from a business perspective. So we've categorized this into security, into network operations, and then there's a whole section around IoT, OT, which I won't get too far into today. So this is what we heard back. In the next slides, we're going to dive a little bit deeper into these different areas.
Very good. Thank you, Bazam. So let's get a little bit into the research that we did recently. We did a survey in April with 404 IT professionals, basically decision makers and influencers, mostly in mid-sized and large organizations in North America. And what we found is that IT is now primarily working from home. Before the pandemic, 19% of IT professionals were working from home. That figure is now 89%. So we're seeing this wholesale shift of the IT profession to a work from home model. In-office work is, for the most part, plummeted. There are still people working in offices, even during stay-at-home orders. Excuse me, or shelter-in-place orders. Decision makers, are allowed to decide. We want certain IT staff still in the office to support our home workers, to maintain the on-premises infrastructure and so forth. But for the most part, people are just working away from an office environment, and most of those are working in home offices. Some still in employer-provided offices, some from co-shared workspaces and so forth. What we also found is that for the rank and file employees, we've again seen this entire shift to the home. Before the pandemic started, 18% of employees were working from home. That figure has jumped to 80%. And that's fundamentally a nightmare for IT professionals who are now being forced to manage employees who are working in a home environment, most of whom never have done that before, or at least never did it on a consistent basis. And so they're now starting to use a variety of applications maybe they've never used before to hold in-person meetings. We've seen this huge increase, for example, in Zoom, going from 10 million users to 200 million users per month in the space of about 3 weeks. We've seen Microsoft Teams jump, in enormous numbers. We've seen WebEx and other tools that have jumped, very significantly in usage, plus a lot of shadow IT applications, a lot of mobile apps, a lot of sort of unsanctioned apps that are now being used for storage, for various types of cloud services and so forth. And so not only do IT staff have to manage the existing network, they now have to manage this flood of other types of applications, mobile apps and so forth, that are hitting the network and accessing critical data resources. They're accessing sensitive parts of the network and so forth. This is a real challenge for IT, and they had very little time to get used to this. Not surprisingly, we see a lot of concerns. We asked decision makers and influencers to, rate on a scale of 1 to 7 just how concerned they were about various things that could happen on the network. Not surprisingly, close to half are concerned that hackers are going to try to take advantage of the current pandemic situation and increase the tenor of cyber attacks. And indeed, we've seen that in the context of phishing. We've seen a huge increase in the number of phishing attacks that have been directed really toward organizations of all types. We see about a third of organizations are concerned about employee errors of various types, maybe opening emails that can contain a link to a ransomware site. They're going to be responding to phishing attempts. They're going to be responding to email cyber attacks and so forth. About a third think that their overall risk profile has increased as a result of COVID-19, and they're probably right. Most organizations today are at greater risk, and that's in part because IT had very little time to deal with this situation. A lot of the stay-at-home orders were handed down, literally in the space of 12 to 24 hours, and so all of a sudden, all of these workers are starting to work from home. A lot of organizations are concerned about data loss because communications are happening outside of normal channels. They're concerned about email and data backup and recovery, just not adequate for a remote workforce. And we'll get into some details here in just a moment.
Great.
So Bassam, I'll hand this over to you.
Great. It's a great point around security. That is the number one, by far, concern that we've heard from people. The fact that now endpoints are much less controlled. These are home machines coming in. Who knows where those home machines have been before and what activities and so on. Much stronger concern around that. A key part of the security concern on lowering risk and so on has to do with encrypted traffic. Now that there's so much more traffic coming in, the need to inspect traffic that's encrypted has become more important than ever from our customer perspective. And once you start decrypting, once you start inspecting traffic, there's a number of implications. So you have a number of choices and a number of steps that people take. So the next slide, I talk about the different options people have for SSL decryption, TLS decryption. The first one is do nothing. Increasing this is becoming less of an option because of the increased amount of TLS traffic, even before all of this changes in the environment, and especially going forward. We have heard a number of those 22 customers we talked to talk about starting to use this opportunity to start to go down their zero trust journey. And I can talk a lot more about that if there's interest at the end. The second option really is to turn on decryption in every one of our tools, inspection tools. So for example, IPS, IDS, firewalls, DLP systems, APM systems, application performance monitoring, each of them has a function, most of them have functions that allow you to decrypt the traffic. It's very easy to do, just turn it on and boom, it starts to see traffic. But the problem with that is as soon as we turn on decryption in one of these boxes, we see performance dropping pretty significantly. And if it's the same traffic that needs to get decrypted through multiple tools, that means we're repeating the same functionality multiple times. So there's a strong push towards centralizing the decryption functionality. And there's this document, you guys can Google it, that the NSA put out. It's an advisory that came out in November of last year that talks about the reason and the need for decrypting and inspecting TLS traffic, and also the challenges that all of a sudden you take on by doing that and how to deal with those challenges. It's a pretty informative document put out by the NSA. So the first option we have is to centralize decryption, as NSA says, but I get a different decryption box and maybe a load balance decryption box and so on. There's some challenges with that approach. And one of the first challenges is, what do I do with the data once it's decrypted? Decryption is not the end goal. It's a means to a goal, and the goal is really to be able to inspect the traffic. But the problem is once you decrypt, it's like having a phone conversation that everybody can hear. You need to send certain traffic to certain tools, be very specific around what traffic you're sending decrypted because it's compliance implications, there's regulatory implications and so on. So from our perspective, we believe that using a visibility analytics fabric is the right approach because it lets you control all of that. On the next slide, we're going to actually get a little geeky here, if that's okay. And let's go to the next slide. We're going to look at what this UI looks like. Now, this is Gigamon's UI. There's other tools that are in the visibility analytics space. They more or less will look something like this. The top half of the center of the screen, the center screen, by the way, is a flow map. So this is, top half is traffic coming in. So from the left side is encrypted traffic. The right side is a set of tools that's meant to handle the traffic. The bottom half is traffic that's going out. So the next click, we're going to see a little bit zoomed in view of this, of the top half. These are called flows. So there's 4 different flows that we've defined here. And this is how decryption works. This is how to keep decryption safe, compliant, and easy to manage and so on. The top flow basically says there's some specific traffic I want to just send directly over to tools as is. The second flow, you see 2 blue boxes. Those are called GigaSmart boxes. And that's decryption. And the right box is re-encryption on the way back out to the tools. So everything between the 2 blue boxes, we call the decryption zone. So at that point, we can literally drag and drop like it's a Visio, literally like a Visio tool. Any kind of tools that we've defined. So there's an IPS tool here. We have an advanced threat protection tool. There could be any number of tools that you put in the decryption zone. And we're also saying that whatever's coming out, just make an out-of-band copy and store that decrypted traffic out there to this specific area and so on. So it's important to define what's being decrypted because it's an inline. We also have out-of-band option, but this is deployed inline in this diagram. We can put any kind of inline tool. If IPS goes down, we simply bypass the traffic and make sure that the situation flows. This, by the way, has become really important in the new COVID world where we're rapidly making changes to our environment. If a system goes down, it's suddenly been overloaded or whatever, there's a failover automatic that with this inline type of deployment, that individual tools will not bring down systems. I'm not going to go over the other flows right now, but basically tremendous flexibility in what you can do. And the out-of-band copy and so on allows you to be much more prepared for any kind of outages and so on. And with that, I'm going to hand this back over to you, Michael.
Great, thank you, Bassam. So one of the issues we wanted to explore in the survey as well was, just how prepared were organizations for all of this? As I mentioned, a lot of these stay-at-home orders, shelter-in-place orders, and so forth were issued, and enforcement began very quickly thereafter. And what we found is that only about 1 out of 5 organizations considered themselves to be very well prepared for something like this, whether it was a natural catastrophe or a pandemic, what have you. Another 32% thought that they were pretty well prepared, but by and large, we found that about half of organizations did not consider that they were really all that well prepared for this in the context of how they enable employees to work from home, their backup schemes, their archiving, their security. Essentially all of the business processes and technologies that they need to keep operating as close to normally as possible. So, this caught people, really off guard in most situations. One of the areas where it caught people off guard is in the context of their backup. A lot of organizations just don't have appropriate backup processes in place for employees who are working remotely. What we found is that, the good news here is that 72% of the organizations we surveyed are still backing up all of the data as they were before. Employees may be using some sort of a virtual desktop interface. They may be using, cloud-based services and so forth. So these things are still being backed up. But for a lot of organizations, they're backing up only partial parts of their data. So there's still a lot of stuff left on employees' home computers, on their laptops, on mobile devices, and so forth. And we found that for 2% of organizations, they're not backing up their data at all. So we're running into problems here where organizations, if they have to recover from a ransomware attack, if they have to have access to old data because something goes awry, many organizations aren't going to have a complete set of data or even any data at all for the time that their employees are working from home. From the perspective of archiving, things are even worse. We found that only about 3 out of 5 organizations are archiving all of their data as they were before. So, significantly less than just for normal backup operations. We found that about 1/3 are backing up only some of their, archiving only some of their data, and 10% aren't doing so at all. This is going to have important ramifications down the road on a number of fronts. I mentioned GDPR, California Consumer Privacy Act, HIPAA, and so forth. Organizations are going to need to, for regulatory compliance purposes, have access to their data at some point, either because of a regulatory audit or a subject access request, whatever the case may be. They're going to need access to archived data, and not all of those organizations are going to have it. Especially in the context of things like e-discovery, early case assessments, and other types of litigation activities, organizations need to have their data archived. Many will not, because they just weren't prepared for it. They don't have either a cloud-based archiving solution, or they don't have the processes in place so that employees can backhaul all of their data to a corporate file server or some other location that gets backed up on a regular basis. So we're going to see some real problems down the road for organizations in the context of compliance because they're just not going to have access to all of their data. One of the really interesting findings from the survey as well is that, we asked organizations, how bad has this hit your organization? How many negative impacts have there been? And what we found is that for some organizations, things have actually improved. They have found that by having employees work from home, things have actually gotten better from an operational perspective. That took us a bit by surprise. We expected maybe a very small percentage, but we actually found 14% have told us that things have actually improved because things are running more smoothly now that employees are not coming into an office. 17% said it has had almost no impact. The vast majority, though, we're looking at 7 out of 10 organizations, said that this has impaired their ability to conduct business normally. Something we certainly would have expected, but obviously in higher numbers.
Great. So we've covered security, at least from a encrypted traffic inspection perspective. Let's look at some of the other feedback we've had. And as I mentioned before, work from home, this was something that we all felt the pain from. And then beyond that, there's performance, there's troubleshooting, there's other things related to usually network operations to ensure that applications are running smoothly, staying up, and so on. And a number of things related to being able to deal with overloaded applications very, very easily and quickly. So on the next slide, we're going to see an actual screenshot of how Gigamon approaches this. And this has been a very popular capability with our customer base. It's a notion of application intelligence. And it's not, being able to identify application is not something groundbreaking. It's not something new. It's been around for almost a decade. I think Palo Alto first introduced this notion with their next-gen firewalls a decade ago. However, from a centralized location, this has become a very important capability to have from a visibility analytics fabric perspective. Why? Because it allows us to choose which applications we want to be pay more attention to and which applications we want to pay less attention to. So as Michael mentioned, shadow IT applications, so Dropboxes, maybe even BitTorrent applications, maybe even cryptocurrency mining applications. These are things that are running on premises. We want to know who's running what type of application, be able to take action specific. So if we see Spotify traffic, we may not want to pay as much attention to it as we might see some other application. So this is our dashboard. In the center, the donut here basically shows you the top 10 applications that are running in my environment automatically. So we're looking at layer 2, layer 3 type of traffic, and we're reporting layer 4 through layer 7 information. The right side shows, for several hundred applications. We track, by the way, up to about 3,500 different applications. So the right side shows applications that are running right now. So Michael also talked about Zoom traffic. If we go to the next click, we're going to see that it's pretty easy to identify just by starting to type the first few letters of these applications, what that application is. And so this is the use case where a lot of our customers have taken these standard webinar, remote teleconference types of applications, and they've decided not to send those to all of their security tools and so on. A lot of organizations will have split tunneling, so you can just have the PCs directly connect to Zoom from outside their home environments and so on. But a lot of organizations have this boomerang traffic that comes back on premises and has to get inspected for many, many reasons. So this is one way to lower the load instantly on our tool. So next click, so here we have selected the tool, the application. So we click on app filtering, and the next click shows what we want to do with that traffic. So on the left are the 3 applications that we've selected. On the right are the tools. We're saying, you know what, let's not inspect this traffic. Just given everything else going on, let's drop the traffic. If we wanted to, we can very specifically say, you know what, let's only send this to our advanced threat protection tool, but not send it to all our tools, not send this traffic over to SIEMs and so on. So it's this very specific application-centric monitoring that that's become a very advanced way that we find our customers have been able to handle and keep up with the load. So while we're in here doing WebEx, Zoom, and GoToMeeting, if we do one more click, we might also choose to take actions around some other traffic, like Facebook. Let us send all the Facebook traffic to these tools, but you know what, Twitter, There hasn't been many reported cases or any reported cases of Twitter, just .com being used as a vector is what happens when you click through the links that I worry more about. But Twitter traffic itself, let's not send it to any tool. So you can be very, very granular, or we provide the ability to have a wholesale approach as well. You can say, send all my social media applications to this tool, send all my media streaming applications to this tool or not that tool. You can say, send my shadow IT. So with these families of applications that we automatically categorize for you, again, up to 3,500 different applications. So this is application identification. The next click we're seeing more around deeper dive into metadata about applications. So in addition to the 3,500 applications we identified, there are about 5,000 different metadata related, application and network related metadata elements that we provide to you. Now, most of our customers export this out to their Splunks or QRadars or whatever else they might have as their SIEM. Why is this important? Because it's really important to get a deeper perspective without overtaxing our SIEM systems. What do we mean by that? This is an example of simply in our previous slide, we saw the checkboxes. So in this case, we go to the metadata screen, we check off expiry dates for my certificates. And we send that off to, this is, I believe, is a Splunk screen. And immediately we start to see how much expired certificates out there, which is a big risk, security concern, what's about to expire and so on. So it lets us not only understand what's going on, but understand in such a way that it lets us take a proactive step towards taking action around things we're learning around metadata and so on. So that's something that helps our customers keep up with change very, very quickly. It's the notion of managing their tools and traffic to the tools by applications, but also getting more out of the data on the traffic itself. So it helps people manage the change. Back to you, Michael.
Great, thank you, Bassam. So fundamentally, what has changed and what has not? Certainly where and how employees are working, that has changed dramatically. We anticipate that's going to be the norm for quite some time. Google announced, for example, earlier this week that they're going to allow all of their employees to work at home through the end of this year. Certainly what has changed is how IT is managing corporate networks. They're having to respond much more quickly to lots of rapid changes in the network, lots of new applications and so forth. And a lot of other aspects of day-to-day operations are also changing. And we anticipate that's going to be the norm really for at least the next several months. What has not changed is really the perennial problems we've had with cybercrime. Things like bad actors still seeking to infiltrate the network and steal intellectual property, steal finances, steal sensitive customer data, and so forth. Network changes being made much more quickly, and there are just more things likely to go wrong. We still see regulators expecting organizations to comply with privacy and other regulations. The European Union, for example, has not backed off on GDPR enforcement because of the pandemic. The California Consumer Privacy Act is still going to be enforced officially starting July 1st. So we still see regulatory requirements being really top of mind for a lot of decision makers because those aren't going away. Organizations still have to protect personally identifiable information, protected health information, really any sensitive customer or other types of data that they are charged with protecting, either as a possessor of that information or as a controller of it. And organizations still have to provide secure access to critical business data so that employees can remain productive. We're finding that sort of this new paradigm of work from home is going to continue for quite a while. And one of the things we found in the research is that more organizations are going to want their employees working from home even after things get back to normal, because they found it's maybe a more efficient way to work. And we're going to see some wholesale changes there in the context of how work is performed. We're seeing, for example, that a lot more organizations are going to accelerate their migration to the cloud. When we asked, about the impact of the pandemic on migration to the cloud efforts, what we found is that 34% said, no, we're not going to do that. We're not going to accelerate because we're already there. But 31% said, yes, we are going to be moving more to the cloud as a result of this, simply because they need employees to be able to access all of their data, all of their applications from wherever they are. Only 28% said it's not going to have any impact or little impact on their migration to the cloud, and 7% just weren't sure. So we are seeing some fundamental shifts in migration to the cloud, in digital transformation and so forth, as a result of this new work from home paradigm. And as I mentioned, more organizations are going to want their employees to work from home. About 4 out of 11 said, no, we're going to want everybody back in the office. We're going to want things to go back to normal. But majority, 56%, said in varying degrees that they are going to want employees to work more from home, either completely from home or maybe 2 or 3 days a week, but they are going to consider work from home as a much more viable alternative. We saw that a number of years ago with big companies like Yahoo and IBM, and then there was a real pullback from that. Marissa Mayer at Yahoo said she wanted people back in the office. IBM said they wanted people back in centralized locations. And so while those organizations pulled back from work from home, we see that the whole work from home phenomenon is going to sort of re-expand, and there's going to, be a rebirth of that in the coming months.
That's right, Michael. We've kind of seen a very similar thing during our questions. And one of the people I spoke with, it's a large, I don't want to get too far into the giving away who the customer might be, Midwestern organization. The person joked, and you might have heard this joke outside of this context as well. Sam, guess what's driving our strongest driver for our digital transformation? Was it the CEO? No. Was it the CIO? No, it's the C19. And COVID's been seriously accelerating a lot of the cloud journeys for our customers as well. We've seen that very common. It's been accelerating some of our customers' zero trust journey as well. And the two aren't independent. They're it's a different way of thinking about applications and such. A couple of quick slides on what Gigamon does. So most organizations, so I talked about what we do and how we help. And what I want to do is show you 2 slides on how we are able to do what we do. Most organizations we walk into tend to have a very complex infrastructure built layer upon layer over time, or through acquisitions and other types of growths as well, where you end up with a mishmash of different network types that's widely distributed. And then we have the tools that ensures that the application is running securely and applications are running smoothly in that environment. The problem is when you have a new tool that you want to roll out, it is extremely difficult to make sure that that new specific tool is able to see all of the data in the environment, it's able to pull in without any blind spots of data. And it's a pretty Herculean effort to do that. So next slide is what we do at Gigamon is we centralize all of that. So you collect the data one time and bring it into this one platform. So we don't provide any kind of persistence. This is really data in motion. However, it's all of the data in one single place. So if you have a new tool that you want to deploy, inline, out of band, doesn't matter, plug into one place, and we'll feed it exactly the right data that it needs. So the way we do that is, first thing we do is access. So we collect the data and then we aggregate it into one place. And as soon as we aggregate the data, there's some obvious benefits we can provide. So a simple one is deduplication. We see between a 33 and 54% duplicate packets in a new organization that will get deployed out to. And as soon as we deduplicate that traffic, that literally means that we're doubling the tool's capacity by taking out duplicate traffic. So we're not taking away any fidelity. We're not taking away any effectiveness of the tools. We're simply making it more efficient. That alone, especially in these COVID times, has a huge impact in getting more life out of the tools. And that's just one thing. The second thing might be around interface compatibility. So if you have a 10 gig or a 40 gig network and you've had some old 10 gig security tools that have been sitting around, you simply can't plug that into a 40 gig network, and they have had to be shelved. With a tool like a Visibility Analytics Fabric, you can actually bring back those old tools because companies like Gigamon provide the throttling and the load balancing needed to make sure each tool is getting the traffic it can handle. So bringing back old out of commission tools and putting those back into service is another big capability as well. And basically then we will do things like decryption that I touched on. Transformation is the application intelligence extraction. And then we'll add intelligence, things like metadata, certificates expiring. We can tell you time between a round trip time between a TCP connection and its HTTP connection. So when you simply look at here's a trend line in your SIEM over the delta between TCP and HTTP connection, and which basically says how fast the application is responding. You can see there was a spike between HTTP response. What does that mean? That means that it's time to innocence. So it's showing that, you know what, this is not a networking issue, this is an application issue. Those type of getting additional intelligence is extremely powerful, and especially in these times when we're trying to debug faster than we've ever had to. Back to you, Michael.
Great. Well, Bassam, thank you very much. So in summary, the suddenness of employees beginning to work from home really has been a shock to most organizations. We found that in the survey, we found that anecdotally, and I'm sure most of you have as well. We have found, however, that a small percentage of organizations have actually thrived during the crisis. And those were primarily those who were more or less prepared for this. Those that had the infrastructure in place, they had the tools in place, they had the training and processes and so forth. And fundamentally, we think there are going to be some really profound changes for some organizations following the crisis, either in terms of their digital transformation, their migration to the cloud, the ability for their employees to work from home and so forth. But certainly there are going to be some major changes coming down the road. So here's our contact information, and we would like to answer any questions you might have. At the top of your interface, you can click on the Q&A button and submit your questions. Bassam, we did have one question come in, and that is, how quickly can your network visibility fabric be implemented if somebody has never been a Gigamon customer before?
That's a very good question, and the answer is going to be, it depends. It depends on the environment. So if it's a super distributed hybrid environment where you've got on-premises systems that are physical network segments, branch offices, that's in the cloud, you have container traffic that needs to be monitored in the cloud, public cloud, and so on. It can become a significant project. So most of our customers will start off with just simple tapping of the network traffic out there. And that process is actually pretty quick. Getting visibility into out-of-band traffic, that's very, very fast. What's a little bit trickier is putting out a system like Gigamon in an inline deployment, where we're processing all the traffic and then being able to add additional tools on top of our inline deployment. And then we will, as I mentioned before, monitor the tools. If a tool goes down, we'll bypass traffic and so on. However, compared to the alternative of whether it's out of band or inline, of deploying a new tool, a new security tool, monitoring tool, whatever else it might be, it is orders of magnitude easier and faster to deploy new tools once we're in place. So you'd have to go through the steps that you would go through to deploy Gigamon, except you do that one time, not over and over and over per tool. Another thing that I actually did leave out is TLS 1.3. TLS 1.3 traffic is growing quite significantly, at least. And to decipher, decrypt, and process TLS 1.3, you really need a man-in-the-middle type of an approach to be able to sort of, if Bassam goes to mybank.com from my corporation, I connect to my Gigamon box in the middle, basically, and then Gigamon box will set up a secure connection over to the bank, and so it's sort of man in the middle type of a pretty standard deployment approach. And those types of deployments are a little bit take a little bit of work to begin with, but again, once that work is done, and that could be taken on incrementally, rolling out new tools becomes exponentially easier.
Very good. One last question we had was, how effective is this in dealing with shadow IT and new applications that are sort of popping up all of a sudden?
Yeah, so that's one area that we feel very confident that we provide a lot of value in keeping track of new applications. So as I mentioned, there's 3,500 new applications that we identify. And every quarter or so, we add several hundred new applications. So for example, last quarter, we added about a dozen cryptocurrency mining applications. That happens because what happens is cryptocurrency mining is not a heavy, it's not a heavy load on a system from a networking perspective, but people will actually, or I can't speak from a use case perspective. We have not, this is a brand new product, or sorry, brand new application. We haven't put it out there, but people do weird stuff at work, and that's a possibility. So we do go out to this, and specifically on Shadow IT. I forget what the number is, but there are several hundred applications we're tracking. So for example, you send it, that's one of the applications, I forget what the new name is in the US, that is commonly used to send files, but there's a dozen other applications. But in addition to that, Michael, there's an application called gogobox.kr. That's a Korean version of You Send It. Now, if I were just in the US IT, I would not know the existence of a Korean version of You Send It that could be used as well. And that's our job, to track these different applications and different global applications, and be able to track that. If I can share one more story on this, actually it's very relevant, very important. As I mentioned, the application intelligence deployment has been the most successful deployment, I think I did mention this, at Gigamon's history, and it's only been out there for a year. So one of our customers, a very large government agency, very secure, we're already running Gigamon, and you have to basically flip a switch to turn on application intelligence. Our sales engineer went in and helped the person turn it on and showed what it's like, and then all of a sudden, the dashboard pulled up and they saw all their applications, and then the government person said, this isn't right because it shows we're running BitTorrent, and that's not possible. And our salesperson looked into it and said, no, it looks like it's running BitTorrent, and the IT person looked at it and said, whoa, come with me. Grabbed our sales engineer, the two of them walked into a security operations center, into their SOC, and the guy shouts, hey guys, we've got BitTorrent running in here. And people then shouted back NFW spelled out the long way. And then they looked into it, and sure enough, in a very secure environment, somebody had figured out a way to run BitTorrent. And we've heard this kind of situation over and over. It's discovering applications that are surprisingly being used out there. So it's a very important function. And that to me also falls into the shadow IT, or unknown application running. That's why this feature is so important.
Very interesting. Well, wonderful. Well, Bassam, that's all the questions we have. I'd like to thank you very much for being on the webinar with us today, and I'd like to thank everyone who attended. We will have a recording of this presentation available tomorrow. If you do have any questions, please feel free to contact us. This concludes the webinar, and thank you so much.